Hello. The program that you're about to watch is presented by the Online Academy of the Integrative Law Institute at Commonweal. Thank you for joining us. Good morning. I am Pauline Tesler, and I want to welcome you to the fifth and last webinar presentation of this series. That's the first series presented by the Integrative Law Institute Online Academy. So I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Pauline. I am the co-founder and was the first president of the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. And now I work as a lawyer and as the director of the Integrative Law Institute at Commonweal. Our mission at the Integrative Law Institute is to reclaim law as a healing profession, and collaborative practice is at the heart of our work. Why? Because divorce is the most common reason why ordinary people will encounter the legal system. The purpose of this series of 5 webinars is to give you, the collaborative community, ideas and tools for making collaborative divorce much more visible in our communities and in our cultures as the very first thought that every person should have when thinking about getting professional help in a divorce. Now, for the 30 years we've been doing collaborative law and collaborative divorce, we know that a person facing divorce will often ask a wise counselor for advice about what kind of professional help to get if they're having trouble with divorce-related conflict. It might be an accountant or a minister or a rabbi or a business colleague. Most of those referral sources, even the ones who are in our own professions as collaborative professionals, don't know that collaborative divorce exists. That's not acceptable. So we have to do something about it. And my goal is that this series of conversations is going to help you be excited and well-equipped to go out and educate the thought leaders in your own communities about why collaborative divorce matters so much and why they should never be sending friends, family, or clients to any place except to a collaborative divorce professional when they need help. So I'm going to introduce Joanne Witt and Erwin Keller and Nancy Schroeder in just a second. They are our guests, but let me give you the usual Zoom meeting tips for the 120th time probably. I'd like you to start by going to your chat box, which is probably at the bottom of your screen, and let us know where you are joining from and what your profession is. And then afterwards, leave chat behind for the rest of the webinar and go to the question and answer department. And we would love it if anything that we're talking about inspires you to make a comment or ask a question. Also, if you look at the little icon at the bottom of each question and comment, you can vote it up. You can friend that question. And if you do that, it will rise to the top and we'll know that it's something that a lot of you would like us to talk about. Finally, give us some feedback at the end about whether this is useful and whether you'd like more of this sort of thing. And then you will get an email sometime over the weekend with links to the recorded on-demand version of all 5 webinars. And I invite you to send them wherever you think they'll do any good. Okay, let's introduce our speakers, guests. Erwin Keller. Erwin Keller started his professional life as an activist lawyer, advocating on behalf of LGBT and HIV communities. And then he was in showbiz for 21 years or so. And then he became a rabbi. And he's now a rabbi and storyteller in the Jewish renewal tradition. Joanne Keller is a Presbyterian minister in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Joanne Witt.
I'm so sorry.
We've only just met.
That was too quick. I'm sorry.
Quick, Joanne, let's have a collaborative divorce.
I did that. Cancel the race. Joanne Witt, Presbyterian minister, San Francisco Bay Area. And interestingly, although I didn't know it until I met you, Joanne, you too started out as a lawyer. And I think you even have had some experience with divorce mediation. Is that right?
That's right.
So you know whereof you speak in this conversation.
Yeah.
And for you, Nancy Schroeder is a senior priest and abiding abbess in the San Francisco Zen Center, which is one of the largest, maybe the largest Zen Buddhist community outside of Japan. Yes?
Yes.
So welcome, hello, and thank you for joining me in this conversation about collaborative divorce. which is news to two out of the three of you, and we'll get to why that is later. To start the conversational ball rolling, and I think that this is going to be a pretty freewheeling conversation, I want to start as big as it can get to my mind, which is with Charles Darwin being, I think, the first main cultural thinker and leader to recognize that our evolutionary superpower as human beings is our hardwired capacity for altruism, love, cooperation, generosity, fairness, all of those qualities that evolutionary psychologists and positive psychologists call prosociality. So we're the apex species because we cooperate and collaborate, beginning in the nuclear family, going all the way to the United Nations, or maybe bigger than that. But the challenge for us humans is that we extend that prosociality to the people that we recognize as like us. And for people that we don't recognize as like us, there's a tendency in our human wiring for a much more primitive kind of us or them, fight or flight, kill it or before it kills me kind of reactivity to happen when we feel threatened. This happens large scale in war and politics, and it happens small scale in the nuclear family when the very normal human transition of a marital breakup turns into an ugly, bad divorce. You're no longer human, kill or be killed. So what do your particular religious traditions have to say about this conflict between good and evil in divorce in human culture? And if it doesn't say anything about it, why not? Would you talk about that, Joanne? Would you start?
Sure. It's truly a global question. Let's see. In the Christian tradition, the understanding is that we're created in God's image, and that people choose for whatever reason to turn away from God. That's what we call sin. But what God wants from humanity is relationship with God and a relationship with the people that God has created, and creation, all of creation. So in the Christian tradition, this relationship with God it centers around what Jesus said were the two great commandments. He got these from the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. This is, not something that came out of the blue in the New Testament. But the two great commandments are love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus defined neighbor as everybody, pretty much everybody, and in fact told parables that said that your neighbor is the person you least likely think that it will be. And I guess what occurs to me off the top of my head is my apologies to anybody who has experienced Christianity as something other than loving, because I know that's happened. So on behalf of the Christian tradition, I apologize. But love is the core. And so love is always hard. Love is difficult, sacrificial, involves compromise, involves listening and understanding. The biblical narrative talks about, being gentle and hearing and patient and listening and patient and all those things. So this would apply to people that we are close to, that we think of as loving, but it would also apply to people that we can't stand, that we treat them with respect and with kindness and generosity and these qualities. And as everybody knows, that's incredibly difficult, but that's the goal. That's the Christian goal.
Thanks, Joanne. So, Erwin, what can you bring from your perspective?
Well, yes, all that, and the love your neighbor as yourself. That's all part of our tradition, Jewish tradition as well. But I think I want to reach into our mystical tradition, which has a certain sense of the ways in which we, in our being sort of in the image of God, we contain within us different qualities that are also present in divinity and are present in all of creation. And in the Kabbalistic tradition, on one side, we have what's called chesed, which is the flow of loving kindness. And that pours through all of us. And then we have, on our left side, we have gvura, which is strength and limitations, boundaries, self-protection as well. It's sort of a container that holds this flow of love. Because if you just have a flow of love, it's very beautiful for a moment, and then it's very hard to get anything done. And if all you have is sort of the hard shell of self-protection and containment, then you're also going to be drawn into conflict. Everything will feel like a threat that you have to protect yourself against, right? Because love is a little bit of a risk. Love is a vulnerability. Mm. And so our Kabbalistic tradition teaches us that when we're in extremis, when we are in the terrible conflict with somebody, it's because we're really leaning into all of this and we're not permitting the flow of this. And so there are many teachings about sort of how to go about unifying them and creating balance sort of in the heart center. So that might be a little bit abstract, but I do want to point out that, not all self-protection is not in itself an evil. Mm. And the things that spark people to escalate in a divorce are not necessarily evil or bad in themselves. It's, as you were saying before, on the human behavioral front, it's responding to a threat. Mm-hmm. But much of the time, the way we respond to threat is appropriate. And so I think there's a question of trying to find the balance and to remember when experiencing this that we need to open up to this.
Thank you. Fu, tell us about a more Buddhist perspective on this problem.
Well, the first thing that came to mind is that there is an acceptance that we are basically endowed from the beginning as individuals with greed, hate, and delusion. We didn't make it up. It just comes with the territory of being born. And that those are powerful forces. They're called the poisonous or the neurotic emotions. And we all have them. We want stuff, we don't want stuff, and we're not sure if we want it or not. So we kind of go through our days basically running from one to the other side of that, those forces or those pulls. And I think what's radical about what the Buddha understood watching his own mind at work, because Buddhism is really, Buddha means awake. So awake to what? Awake to how the operations of your mind, how the mind and consciousness are functioning to create an illusion of something being outside of yourself that you don't have, or that something is coming at you that really is just your imagination. So I think penetrating the illusion of deceptive projections and fantasies and imaginings and so on. I mean, most of us humans who get into conflict with other humans are kind of making things up. Race is a construct, it's not a real thing. So and the self is a construct. According to the Buddha, it's not a real thing. So self-protection is an illusory need that once we realize there's nothing, there's no substance here. I'm not a thing. I'm a process or a flow, like you were saying, a flow of love and disturbance and happiness and greed and all that. If I'm not caught up in that, if I don't get stuck or caught, as we say, then the flow can go and I can actually ride the river. I don't have to be, jump up and down with the changes of the conditions that I'm in. I can actually meet the conditions with some consideration by, as you said, evolutionarily, the vagus nerve is what charges us to act like reptiles. And as mammals, if we're calm, we can respond considerately. If we're not calm, if we're hysterical or angry or charged, we will act that way. So that's why we meditate a lot. Just try to calm down, and now we can talk. If you don't calm down, you just better get a lawyer, right?
Well, I don't even know where to go with all of this richness, with this wealth of wisdom that really does relate directly to not only the work that you do, but the work that we do as divorce lawyers and specifically collaborative lawyers. So one way that I think and teach about this, which is exactly what the thread is that I see in what the three of you have said, is that there are two major institutions, three really, but the two that we're looking at today, in every human society, the two that help us deal with this kind of challenge are religion and the law. And for purposes of today's conversation and lens, it seems to me we could talk about the religious values you three have been presenting about conflict as religion representing the aspirational. It's the institution where we're invited when it's hard to do it, to reconnect with that incredible pro-social endowment that we've been given just by being born a human being, of being able to connect and love and cooperate and be altruistic. It's really amazing, those capacities, and they are hardwired, but we get out of connection. And it seems to me that we could look at law as the institution we've come up with for punishment and consequences and guilt and your fault, my fault. That's the institution that we've come up with because we live in such huge, enormous communities of humans that it's kind of beyond our own individual capacities to deal with it. When we have that kind of rupture with another human being, especially another human being we don't care about. And that's what law is really good at, fender benders and Samsung versus Google versus Apple versus whoever. But the problem is that our societies have instructed us that the place to go, if you're in love with somebody and then you're not, and you're having conflict about it, the place to go is the same place where you deal with a car crash or with enormous mega corporations fighting about money. And what we all know, but especially divorce lawyers know, is what a wrong place that is to assign the cultural responsibility for helping people. Because the only thing that that system can do when you're dealing with a kind of conflict where the law is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg of what's going on, it throws gasoline on the flames. It leaves people worse off than when they came in. It destroys the capacity to parent kids. So I see collaborative divorce, and I pitch this to you for us to continue in our conversation about, I see collaborative divorce as this amazing discovery. It's an evolution, really. It wasn't a discovery, it was an evolution toward a restorative process that's in time. We just saying goodbye to that institution. We ain't going to go there. It's the wrong place. Courts are not the right place. So what do you do instead? You do what you folks have been describing. You help people reconnect with those aspirational and also hardwired values that make us love and care for people, even if we're not in an intimate primary relationship. We still love and care for one another. And collaborative divorce professionals are learning how to invite people to rise to the occasion and to move through this normal human transition in harmony with the deepest values that they hold and aspire to. So, having said that, if my work is at the intersection of love, conflict, and law, your work, what does your work have to say about people who are going through a divorce? Where do we intersect? Where did the collaborative divorce movement professionals intersect, or should we be intersecting with the work that you do when people in your communities or your tradition have a love relationship that's falling apart and they can't deal with it? Should we start with, well, let's start with you, Fu, because you told me that you don't really do that.
Well, I mean, some of the immediate relationships I have living in community, there's about 60 of us who live here together, and there's married couples and children and so on. We haven't had divorces. We've had couples form that separate, but with the children, they pretty much have stayed responsible to raising the children. But I was thinking when you were talking that it's sort of like what's happening when people are afraid, you know, they call the police rather than the social service worker or the person, you know, we had a person who was really upset, mentally ill, and people told us, well, call 911, that the doorway to mental health in Marin County is the police. So we've created this system again, like law, where you call these professionals to come in and do something that's maybe not appropriate to what's actually happening with these people. They're afraid, they're angry, they're upset. So, and we're kind of like social service folks. We actually understand the human condition pretty well as ministers. I think that's what drew us into our work. And it seems like we need a more nuanced response. And I really like what collaborative law, as you've described it and I read about it, it's like taking the children into account, taking the people into account. There will be feelings, as my friend who's a lawyer said, always puts a box of Kleenex there. There will be feelings, but we're going to have this conversation and work through that. And I feel as though one of the main issues that's really bedrock for our culture is a society, and there's an excellent essay about this, that we're based on rights. You know, it's in the Constitution, it's carved in the granite, rather than compassion. And a society based on compassion, as some are, is a really different approach to what's the problem here. You know, let's all talk, let's sit down and work on this together. So if you have rights, I'm right and you're wrong. It's a very dualistic way of approaching conflict. So I think we have a core issue around treating things as adversarial just from the get-go. So,
Yeah,
you know.
That's really illuminating in terms of the way that we in the collaborative community see our work as part of the restorative justice movement, which is, and as Erwin pointed out, and as I deeply believe, conflict is not the enemy. Conflict is a sign that something is not being handled skillfully and needs to be fixed, that we need to go up a level and figure out a better way to do what we've been doing. And looked at from that perspective as what the job of a lawyer is, that's really rich. That's restorative. That's reestablishing connection. So I see now, when I didn't the first time we talked about it, a lovely intersection between your thinking and the work that we do, Fu. How about you, Joanne?
Well, I'm thinking, you know, how do we encounter divorce in the work that I do? Usually by the time a couple has reached a place that they know they're going to be divorced, my work with them would be moving toward healing, not necessarily healing the relationship between the people, but healing the pain and the grief that arises from it, and healing a relationship that they can, I mean, just the way collaborative divorce describes, healing the relationship in a way that they can part in a way that doesn't destroy them and doesn't destroy the children if there are children. So I think sadly, oftentimes because there's a stigma attached to divorce, people will disappear before they bring it to a pastor. That's a sad thing. But more often people will come just looking for some sense of healing, some sense of comfort, you know, support from the community that they're okay, that they're going to be okay.
Erwin.
Well, I think we intersect with the mechanics of divorce in a number of ways. In the Jewish world, of course, Jewish religion also incorporates a legal system. There's a Jewish legal system that Orthodox Jews still abide by, and some conservative Jews do. And I don't know if any of the practitioners in the room have had that experience, but it will add more complexities, but also perhaps some more clarities in some ways. It adds some inequality between men and women, which is problematic. But at the same time, Orthodox marriages will have all been entered into with the ketubah, which is a kind of a prenuptial agreement. And so there's a little bit more advanced consideration of what divorce might look like in those communities. Then, of course, the gender inequality ends up playing a horrible role, and in extreme cases, creates an opportunity for extortion. But those are not couples who are going to come for collaborative divorce. I think we interact with the issue of divorce in our premarital counseling. The people that, I presume all of us, when we officiate at marriages, we've also spent time with the couples, and we've talked about a number of issues, and we can talk about that later, but that's a time to talk about what divorce might look like. And I also want to put in a pitch that we attend our weddings with ritual. That is, we attend to the getting married in a framework of ritual, and we let go of that at the time of divorce. And we let the marriage fizzle out like a business going belly up. And to the extent that in our communities we can create a practice of having some kind of release ritual, which, you know, in sort of Orthodox communities, there is something kind of like that, although not terribly satisfying, but we can create rituals that people can anticipate having, where they release each other, where they bless each other, where they bless the children and the children bless them. And having an anticipation of that ahead is also a way, I would hope, of drawing better behavior and a greater quality of love, and sort of getting out of the self and looking at what's going on from a little bit of a distance or a little bit of an aerial view, because you know that this ritual is coming up, and it makes you a little bit more accountable to yourself, or to God, or to the whole, in a way that you might not otherwise be when you're tunnel vision in the divorce. So a pitch for ritual.
Well, it's interesting that you make that pitch for ritual, because I'm here to tell you that the collaborative community had collectively, and wherever it pops up, we seem to spontaneously recognize that if you want to do a restorative process that operates in the realm of values rather than in the domain of law and consequences and guilt, then you begin by inviting people to reflect on their own deepest values. In essence, we're saying, what kind of person do you want to be in this challenging experience? When you look back on this 5, 10, or 20 years from now, how do you want to account for who you were in this process? And beginning that way, we can invoke those values as we move through it. We can all call ourselves to account for the values that we've identified at the front end that we wish to be held accountable to, that we wish to aspire to. But at the end, when the process goes as we hope it will, it doesn't always stay at the plane of highest shared values, but when it does, often many collaborative communities have developed the practice of ending with a ritual, precisely because of what you talked about, Erwin, which is that in a legalistic court-based divorce, even mediations can be court-based in the framework of thought and discussion that happens. The event is defined by pieces of paper. Lawyers will tell you a divorce begins when you file a petition and it ends with a judgment. Well, what person, what human being is going to tell you that that's when their divorce began and ended? How about never is when divorces end, when people are deeply connected? So what we do is create a sense of ritual at the front end by that values conversation. But then at the end, we invite people to sort of sit up and accept some self-congratulation and praise for having risen to the occasion. And people are often moved, the couple, to do
what does that look like, Pauline? What does that kind of moment or ritual look like?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the best ones that ever happened spontaneously in one of my collaborative divorces is, it was a couple who really cared about each other and really had to divorce, and they had hurt one another a lot, and then they didn't. And they did a good job in the collaborative divorce after a lot of therapy. And the woman asked if she could have some time at the end of the last meeting, where we usually sign documents and predict speed bumps and so forth. So we said, sure. And she brought out a bag she'd brought, and she created a little altar in the middle of the collaborative table, and she lit some incense and she lit a candle. And she looked at her husband and she said, I know how much I've hurt you. I am so sorry. Can you forgive me? And I forgive you and I thank you. And of course, I still tear up when I talk about it. Everybody in the room was crying. And he did the same thing. And I have to think that that 8-year-old kid that was the motivation for coming into the process had a life unlike what they were set up for when they first came in the room. So that's what I'm talking about ritual. We don't tell people to do it, but we invite them to do it. And because we have mental health professionals on our teams who work in a coaching model, you know, if the couple seems like they might be open to it, they get some coaching about the value of that sort of thing. So I'm seeing a huge convergence in our Venn diagram right at this moment.
What I like about this idea of ritual, especially from our faith leader perspective, is that a ritual would help a community gather around people. Mm-hmm. You know, if somebody dies, the widow or widower will be flooded with casseroles and sympathy and visits. If somebody gets divorced, mm-hmm. that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So some sort of ritual that embraces this as a significant life event that is probably healthy if done well, would be a terrific transition, terrific idea.
Wow. So I know, Fu, I've been present at some of the rituals that you've officiated at. What do you think? Is there a Buddhist divorce ritual in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like it's happening now, which is wonderful. Certainly ritual is the core of how we express, you know, it's expression. It's ritualized as enactment of our love and our compassion and our devotion and our ethics and so on. So we bow to things, you know, represent images that we value, like compassion and wisdom and so on. But I was recently really inspired by a friend who gave me a book on the Hawaiian forgiveness ceremony, which sounds very much like you were just saying, Joanne. It's so simple. And I actually tried it with someone I wasn't exactly divorcing, but I was having some trouble with. And it's just 4 things. You say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. And by the time I got to I love you, I was crying, and the woman was crying, and then she said, can I say that to you? And I said, yeah. And so by the time we were finished, we have a new relationship. It's magic. It really is magic in the way that I think we have missed that the village knowledge about how you do these transitions in life. I think our grandmothers and maybe knew better, or great grandmothers, but we've lost something about ritual that I think is really important.
This is at the heart of it. And, you know, I do a lot of my teaching in terms of evolutionary psychology and neuroscience, but it comes to exactly the same place because we're still wired the way we were as a Paleolithic species. We're cave people in terms of our physiology and wiring. And I like to imagine that when Harry and Sally back in the cave had one of those flare-ups that all young couples have, that the women took Sally away and the men took Harry away and said, you know, it happens to all of us, but we can deal with it. And if Harry was really recalcitrant, maybe he had to go to another cave. You said that sometimes happens in the Zen community. They have to go to another cave, but it works. And that's what a restorative process is. So we're invoking something very primal and fundamental about the species when we talk about this. So how can we all get together on this? How can the collaborative community talk to the religious faith leader community in ways that could get them into a conversation like this with us? How do we do it? Mechanically, how do we find them? Where do we reach out to them? How do we connect with them? And is this worth doing? Who wants to start? Somebody.
Well, I think the work is, we were talking about this a little bit the other day when we met, and we were talking about, you know, what are the denominations, how do you reach the denominations as a whole? But I think the work really needs to be done on a local level, sort of clergy by clergy. So you see who are the churches near me, and who are the who are the priests and ministers and rabbis, and make appointments and tell them about collaborative practice. And I think in addition to making sure that they know this is available when couples come to them who are divorcing, I do think the suggestion that this be raised also in premarital counseling is an important one. That's a place where you can set a tone for, what do you expect from each other? How would you like to be, and what would you like from the other in the case that you're having marital difficulties, and in the case that you decide for any reason that you're better off splitting up. What are the values that you want to make sure are in the room when that starts happening? And that's a conversation that can happen before couples are married, should happen before couples are married. Make sure there isn't a taboo on talking about this. And that's a place where where saying, you could, for instance, agree that if you ever break up, that you would do collaborative practice in the divorce. Nothing like that is binding, but the intention could be powerful.
Absolutely. And of course, when we do formal prenuptial agreements in the collaborative community, we write that into the prenup. We start with the values rather than the law, and we build the expectation that conflict is normal and that this is how you get the help for it. That I think that one of the ways we deal with the shame associated with divorce and the lack of rituals associated with it is because it has been considered a shameful failing. And to the extent that we normalize in the premarital conversations, that we normalize the expectation that there will be conflict, it can be resolved. There are ways of approaching that are constructive and to be proud of, not to be ashamed of. And here's a roadmap. Here's what you could commit to now. Joanne, what do you think?
Well, I was a couple of things. I think it's very hard to get people generally past the idea that a divorce is a failure. And so I think that's one of your first hurdles. But as far as getting the news out, at least most Protestant congregations have some kind of an adult ed program. Typically it'd be something like after worship, there'll be an hour's worth of some kind of program that it varies from social justice stuff to Bible study to all sorts of things. This would kind of be ideal for that. And while I'm guessing there would be a lot of people who would be afraid to go because, their spouse will think they're planning to end the marriage, there'd be a whole lot of parents whose kids are splitting up, who are watching their kids go through something devastating and wrenching, who are going to want to know about this. So I think that would be a really ideal opportunity.
That's a great idea. And I think that you touch an important point, which is I think that part of this invitation to the religious community from the collaborative community is help us normalize this notion of divorce. It's not something we want, but it happens to more than half of marriages.
Yeah, it is normal.
So it is statistically normal, and in non-marital relationships at a much higher percentage. So, for example, I could see people in your position who might have after services gathering like that, to use that event itself as the normalization and to say, it doesn't mean you're thinking about divorce. Who in this room hasn't been touched by divorce? If not your parents, then your sister or your child or your friend, but nobody goes through this life without the entire community being affected by bad divorces. And this is the way to help your community not to have to go through that. Fu, what do you think?
Well, in terms of connecting, as I mentioned, I think when we talked before, is that the interfaith councils in almost every community. So that's a great place to hit everybody at once, is to get a hold of your interfaith council and bring forward this collaborative work. Because we have trainings around mental health, we have trainings around all kinds of things that are really mutually interesting to the rabbis and the ministers and the Buddhists. So, and then while I was thinking about my own life, I thought, well, I fell in love, and that's when I got married. And there's this little song came to mind: love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. Well, actually, they don't. It's not such a good idea to put love and marriage together. I think it would be much better if they were separated, and that love was one thing, and you really have to work on that, like you, because that's just like, it's not a disease exactly, but it's a fascination. It's kind of an intoxication that we all know about. And getting married when you're intoxicated is not advisable. So how to become sober about what's happening when you get married is what's going to happen when you get divorced. You don't even know about that. So when I got divorced, I learned about law. I didn't think about law when I was getting married, even a little bit. So I think to help counsel young people, as we oftentimes have a chance to do, but we're a pretty secular society now. So you all as attorneys might have a better chance to meet with young people ahead of their marriage. Maybe we'll do this.
The last thing that they would want to do is come to a lawyer.
Well, that's it. And I think, I sign these things and I'm like, do you know what, this is a legal contract? It's not just a love thing.
Yeah, if you don't create your own premarital contract, then the state gives you one, and it's a shock when you discover it during a divorce that that's what you signed up for.
Your house and your children, and so I think it would be good to educate high school kids. Get into the educational system with the realities of the law around marriage.
So we've got the ideas of reaching out to individual clergy, with the interesting possibility of pitching to clergy that we could present at gatherings after services in a way that the clergy could help us to frame as a constructive experience that you would go through to help those you love when this happens, not if it happens. We've heard about the Interfaith Council, which is a place locally and regionally where we can reach the leaders in many faiths at one time with educational programs. The idea that educating young people about the intoxication and drunkenness of love versus the hard reality of marriage. When we prepared for this conversation, we had a couple of ideas came up, including separating the religious ceremony of marriage from the legal state-sanctioned financial relationship, which is really what that's about.
I.e., I think the discussion went to eliminating state-sanctioned marriage. Isn't that where we ended up?
Oh, no, I think it's a very useful thing about organizing finances. It just should be more conscious and limited to what it is. That's all it is. It tells the state who your official next of kin is, so you can come to the hospital, for instance. It has its uses, just as conflict does. And then, Erwin, you talked about divorce cafes. Do you want to float that one?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone would ever show up for it, but I had this idea when we were talking the other day, for the same reason that Joanne was talking about whether people would show up for the presentation by the collaborative lawyers, is that we have such a taboo on talking about divorce in general in the culture. You can gossip about other people's, but you can't, if you're married, you can't talk about the possibility that you might get divorced. In much the same way that people feel like they can't talk about their own deaths. And there's been this movement over the last years to do these death cafes where people sit and they talk about what they want, how, what's the music I want playing, and how do I want decisions made, and what do I want done with my body, and sort of taking down the taboo and making it okay, breathing some air in and making it okay to have this conversation. And I wonder what it would be like for clergy, for instance, to hold a divorce cafe and invite all the, invite married couples to come and just talk about, which can also be an entree into couples talking about creating new opportunities and language to talk to each other about what they love and value in each other and what they want to change in their marriage. And I think that it's also hard for many couples to do that. But this might be a place where those conversations can begin.
So I love that idea. And I think with a slight tweak, the attendance might go up. What if it wasn't called a divorce cafe? What if it was called a
Marriage cafe.
a constructive conflict cafe?
Love
Right?
cafe.
Because I do think of conflict, if it's understood correctly, as one of the most powerful constructive forces that we've got. It's like Kali in the Hindu religion. There are things that have to die in order for growth to happen. And that's true in marriages too. Anyway, we've got a lot of fertile ideas swirling around here. I want to turn to the chat column where I'm discovering that we've got people from Italy, Portugal.
And there's some good questions in the Q&A.
And we've got good questions we're going to go to, but we've got people from all over the world, Rio, Alberta. So let's look at the question and answer box now. Steve Kaplan says, how do you deal with some faiths where divorce is taboo or shunned, or even prohibited, I guess? You can't stay in the faith if you divorce. Anybody want to speak to that? I think it's maybe more of some Christian denominations might have that kind of rigidity about divorce. Would that be true, Joanne?
There are still some Christian denominations that prohibit divorce, or if you get divorced, then you're a different status in the religion. There are some Christian denominations that don't allow no-fault divorce, or what we call no-fault divorce. Who say there has to be either adultery or desertion. That still exists. That's not. I'm part of the Presbyterian Church USA. That's not what my denomination believes, but yeah, that exists.
Wow.
Yeah. So talk about shame.
So is there any point in trying to reach out to those faiths? Or should we, I had a conversation with a family law judge, Ross Foote, in talking about outreach to judges. He says, forget about the ones that are hidebound and rigid. Find the ones who aren't. Find the ones who are curious and open. Is that how we should be thinking about outreach to the faith community? Forget about those who are so stuck in negativity that this is going to just fall on deaf ears?
Well, I think there's so few people who know about this already. I think what I'm imagining is that, you'd start with the people who are going to be more receptive, and it would filter out. It would filter out to the people who need it. And there's going to be a lot of people who need it.
Yes, there are. Roy Martin asks, hi Roy, are there societies based on compassion? I'd love to know more about that, because it's what we so struggle with in our culture and in our work. Fu, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I don't want to fantasize that they're pure strains, but I think some of my experience of spending time in Japan and some of the other East Asian cultures where there's such a dominant underpinning of Buddhist thinking, which has gone back for a couple thousand years, that's based on compassion. So a lot of the way people express the culture is like, I heard you could leave your purse, on the street in Tokyo, nobody would ever take it. So I think there are cultures that have been imbued with a certain sense of moral correctness or righteousness in a certain way. I don't want to be romantic about that, because I don't live in those cultures and I don't know what the underbelly is. But we're trying to create a culture like that here in our tiny little footprint in the coast of California, and spread the idea that maybe it is about ideas, and the compassion is a really good one. So,
yeah, it strikes me from what that triggered in my mind the reading and study I've done about what anthropologists call high context and low context cultures. And the East Asian cultures, I think that you may be referring to, are cultures where people don't think of themselves in the way we do as isolated individuals moving and bumping into other isolated individual bundles of rights. That people live in a web of human connection. That's really what our evolutionary endowment is, and how it is that we thrive. And so when you're talking about conflict, you're talking about a conflict that's happening to a system, which is really the nature of restorative practice. And what we're really trying to aim for in the collaborative work that we do is to encourage couples to see themselves as part of an ever-expanding web in which there's one another, there's the children, there's the extended family, there's the community, there's the work relationships, all of which are affected by any rupture that's not handled skillfully. but maybe Buddhism and that web of connection in which it emerged have a natural kind of affinity about compassionate conflict.
Well, you know, it was only recently that Buddhists, and we're a kind of weird strain that has actually married, where you know, we have married clergy now because of Japan, but that's only about 100 years or so. So mostly Buddhists have been divided into celibates, the male celibates and female celibates, and then lay people. So the celibates served the laity, and they were the people who would be resources to help the families to thrive and to be, you know, to be moral and have moral guidance and so on. So that is a system that would the underpinning of those societies has that understanding. So we're kind of hybrid situation. We're trying to bring in the Western Enlightenment and the Eastern Enlightenment and see how these two things work together. This individuality is kind of toxic. And then too much of collaborate, I mean, just you know, one thing is also going to be really toxic, as we've seen in wars that have been fought under the one banner, you know. So both sides can be too extreme. So kind of looking for something in the middle.
The middle way, which is sort of what you were talking about when you talked about the Kabbalistic principles, Erwin. Did you want to throw something more into this part of the conversation before we move on? No? Okay. So Anne Bouchot, who's from here in Marin County, one of the colleagues I work with a lot, a psychologist who's just written a book that's coming out soon about bird nesting, which is a way that couples who are separating and have children can handle the stressful first year or two by using the family home as the nest and moving in and out of it. So look for Anne's book, but she wanted to mention a book by a woman called Manza Naff, Must We Say We Did Not Love, which is all about divorce rituals. And Anne points out that it's a lovely book. And you folks might be looking at that if you're willing to entertain that possibility that we could work together on divorce rituals in your communities. Sharon Clark asks, how do you handle a person that wants to use the authority of their religious leader to argue against a divorce? Anybody want to venture?
Well, that's a tough one because a religion that looks to a highly authoritative central leader is going to turn to that person, and that's a tough one. I don't know.
I think it is a tough one. It's a patriarchal approach. It's a law and order kind of approach. The courts are the place, I think, where people tend to end up. And we do know that in the so-called red states of the South, which tend to have pretty active fundamentalist religious communities, oddly enough, the incidence of divorce is higher than in places like Northern California, where people don't go to church quite so much. Maybe it's because of that. I don't know. That there isn't a constructive response, that there's only an authoritarian response. I don't know. Beyond our competency, this foursome. We are right about at our wrap-up time. I'd like to really ask all of the people who have joined us in this conversation to go to the chat or the question and answer box, but chat is better probably, and give us some feedback. Is this useful? Did you get something you're going to work with? What are you going to do with this? Do you want more of this? And I really want to thank the three of you. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Very helpful. Very sweet.
Thank you so much. And maybe we'll do more with this. Maybe
Look up some rituals.
Yeah. Interfaith.
Interfaith convocation of how we can develop divorce rituals that normalize this experience that so many people are going to go through. That'd be a nice project. Okay, let's do it. And I will see you elsewhere. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you both.
Thank you for joining us in this recorded program presented by the Online Academy of the Integrative Law Institute at Commonweal, known as ILLI. You'll find many more webinars, video workshops, and conversations on our website. But even better, subscribe to ILLI's YouTube channel for early access to cutting-edge video programming made specifically for conflict resolution professionals. Our programs are either free or priced very affordably, but the production costs run high in both time and money. So if you like this program, please help us produce more high-quality videos like it by making a tax-deductible contribution today to the Integrative Law Institute. Thank you.